Hello! My name is Bubs, I'm an artist, and I like to hear myself talk. And today I'd like to hear myself talk about Pokémon. At long last, I get to talk about the thing that made me the creative that I am today. It was one of the first real gaming experiences I sought out myself, and helped introduce me to non-Western art for really the first time ever. It was a really defining thing for me. On to the task at hand, though, there are like hundreds of Pokémon, right? You've got Pokémon that look like dogs, cats, mice, bats, snakes, trees, fish, bees, I'm giving up on rhyming, birds, rocks, assorted household objects, buildings, food, dragons, dinosaurs, strange men, strange women, foxes, squirrels, horses, pigs, Pikachus, random made-up bullshit, and so much more. I could go on forever because there are so many creatures. The trouble with having so many, though, is that you have a much higher likelihood of greenlighting some questionable ideas. It makes sense why people thought Big Rock with Big Rock Nose was a really good idea that deserved to make it all the way to release, when you consider that they turn out about 100 new pocket monsters with each generation. I say that, but I actually like Nosepass and Probopass. Sound off in the comments about how that makes my Pokemon opinions invalid or some shit. Your hate only fuels my yapping. Anyways, there are some designs that have always irked me, and I, independently, purely for fun, decided to tackle some of these designs to try and make them more appealing to me. Recently, however, I remembered that I did these and thought, hey, content! So here we are. Unfortunately, most of this video is actually going to be me talking about what I don't like about the originals because I didn't really record the process of the redesigns. I'll still show them, but they'll be in Procreate time-lapse, so sorry about that. If I do this again, I'd properly screen record it. Also, unfortunately, I didn't really make the art in the Pokemon style, at least not that intentionally, because I suck at such things, but I did try to keep my redesigns in the realm of something that Freaktendo would actually release. Obvious disclaimer, just because I don't love these Pokemon designs doesn't mean you can't. I'm sure that I like plenty of Pokemon that you don't, like Probopass, and that's fine. That's the beauty of Pokemon. My most sincere hope is that I do a good enough job redesigning these that you think it's neat even if you like the original just fine. If not, that's okay too. This is for fun and not that serious, so have fun with me. If me potentially bashing on a design you like is not going to be fun, then click away and maybe we can hang out on another day. Last thing before I get into all of this properly, I wanted to say something regarding Pokemon design discourse that I see all the time and am deeply annoyed by. If you want to skip this part because I've already stalled too long, here's a timestamp, or just click to the next chapter, but I want to yap about this for a little bit because this is my channel, and I'm allowed to. Anyways, I am very much against the idea that a Pokemon design is bad just because it is ugly. I am really tired of seeing people criticize certain Mons as having a terrible design just because they aren't either the cutest, prettiest, or coolest thing to ever exist. It's bad criticism and frankly poor media analysis. There is sometimes overlap between bad designs and ugly designs, but sometimes a design is supposed to be ugly. Phoebus is a great example. The whole concept is that Phoebus starts as an ugly fish and turns into a beautiful sea serpent, to mimic how Magikarp starts as a pathetic fish and turns into a badass sea serpent. There are plenty more examples where the intention of them is definitely to be ugly for whatever reason, so if you find them ugly, the design, shocker, is actually good because it's doing what it's meant to do. You don't have to like it, but calling it a bad design on that alone is just silly. My targets will be ones that I genuinely do not understand what I'm supposed to be getting from the design, which is actually what a bad design is. That being said, again, it's just my personal perspective, and while I am going to try and articulate why I have a problem with the official design, some of these things might be super clear or appealing to you, so take this all with a grain of salt. Alrighty, settle in, make sure you have a refreshing beverage, and let's do this. We shall be starting with Hypno was actually the first one of these that I did, and is also kind of my favorite redesign. Now, I know that Hypno is Gen 1, and it's just mean to bully Gen 1, but let's be for real. this design is rough. I don't love this design in general, as it just doesn't personally appeal to me, but from an actually critical point of view, my biggest issue is that this thing does not look like it should evolve from Drowsy. I actually really like Drowsy's design. For some reason, I see a lot of people hate on Drowsy and very little hate on Hypno, and I have no idea why. Drowsy to me is way more readable. It's a lot more bold shape-wise and has higher contrast, making it far more interesting to look at. The pattern on its belly, along with its expression and posing, give a very whimsical vibe while still feeling potentially sinister. The inspiration is also far more clear for him too. After a little research, I discovered that the original inspiration for Drowsy was the Baku, which is a Japanese dream-eating folk beast that most closely resembles a tusked tapir with a lion's mane and tail. Though from the research I did, several cultures have similar creatures and the depictions can vary. Still, that checks out. Drowsy is a dream eater who looks like a tapir. Maybe not a Baku specifically, but that's kind of where the evolution thing should have come in. Like, it would have been perfect for Drowsy to look more generic tapir and then have Hypno be much more mythical looking creature. However, unfortunately, Hypno is just a dude. A strange, small piss man. Now, the hypnotist thing is very clear, credit where credit is due, and it does seem like they attempted to kind of elicit the idea of a Baku by giving Hypno that fluffy neck collar thing, so kind of like giving it a mane, but in many ways, I see Hypno as a downgrade from Drowsy, and that is not what you should do with an evolution. See, Hypno has less contrast, a less interesting shape, and less clear association with the Baku. Also, let's be honest, if Hypno didn't have the ring, the hypnotist idea would not come across in the slightest, which wouldn't be all that silly if it was actually part of Hypno's body. That's not the worst thing in the world, as plenty of Pokemon have gimmicks like that, but my point is more that the execution of the idea here is not very strong or all-encompassing, and coupled with a low visual interest to start with, I find the design to be very weak. So my goals for the redesign was to kind of take advantage of what I see as a missed opportunity and lean further into the Baku idea without completely working up from the ground. I was trying to challenge myself here with not changing the pose, colors, and concept too drastically, and this is kind of something I try to do with all of the redesigns. First, I wanted Hypno to have that darker color on it so that it had a little more visual association with Drowsy, while also making there be more contrast on the design. It also allowed me to add in some ring-shaped markings, since the ring is really important to Hypno according to the decks, and this way it will actually be incorporated into the whole design. I considered giving Hypno a trunk, but I decided I actually didn't mind the idea of Hypno being sharper compared to the very round Drowsy, so instead I just turned up the pointy beak nose to lengthen the face. I thought this could sort of still be like a trunk. It might not come across, but that's what I was going for. I also added in horns and tusks as well as turning the weird rough collar into a floofier mane, obviously to try and conjure the idea of the Baku a little better. For the same reason, I ended up giving Hypno little hoof feet and a tail, and the tail actually presented a really fun idea to me. See, Hypno's whole thing is that it jumps out at you if you're wandering around the woods at night and swings its little ring back and forth to hypnotize you. Now, you'll have to forgive me for asking a logical question of the Pokemon universe, but why the hell would I look at his stupid little ring? I know that it's supposed to hypnotize you in a matter of seconds, but if a freaky little dude leapt out in front of me while I was alone in the woods at night, I'm screaming and running away, not worrying about whatever he's swinging around from his hand. So, I had the idea to make the tail the ring, with the idea that it can hide in the brush of the woods with the little tail sticking up and being the only thing visible. There, it could lie in wait for passersby while slowly and rhythmically swinging the tail back and forth. Frankly, it makes more sense than ambushing someone to hypnotize them. Last time I checked, in real life, there's a common idea that you can't hypnotize a person that has their guard up, so yeah. Originally, I had the ring hang from the tail, but I decided that was too complicated and just made it part of the tail. I think it's a more interesting execution of the idea anyways. I really like what I ended up doing. I feel like I haven't ever really seen a Hypno redesign, which, again, I do not get, and I think I did a good job with it. I don't know, I like that it still really reads as Hypno, just a little elevated and a little more obviously related to Drowsy. It's also a small thing, but I really like that I added those little tufts of fur on its ankles. I think it just makes the hair feel less out of place and made Hypno feel more like a creature than just a weird dude. Anyways, moving on to the next one. Or, in this case, ones. plural. Heh. Originally, I was only going to do Jynx, but I thought that redesigning Jynx would just make Smoochum look very out of place, or rather, more out of place, so I decided to just try my hand at both. However, most of my gripes lie firmly with Jynx and Jynx alone. Oh gosh, where to start with this shit show of a design? So, first things first, the elephant in the room. I hope I don't actually have to explain what the issue with the original official version of Jynx happened to be, but supposedly, and buckle up because I'm about to mispronounce a bunch of Japanese words, the idea behind Jynx was to mimic gyaru, a Japanese fashion culture, and based on my own understanding of the topic, she was specifically meant to lean into ganguro, which is a subculture of gyaru. This fashion was popular around the time that Pokémon was first being developed and launched, at least from what I read, so this makes sense. But there's a bit of an issue here. See, ganguro in English supposedly translates to blackface. That's my cue to start backing up out of this topic because I am neither black nor Japanese, and therefore am not the person to try and discuss it. What I can discuss, however, is that Jynx doesn't look like she's doing gyaru fashion, even a little bit, aside from perhaps the bleach blonde hair. The dress with the very odd hip spikes and the flat hairstyle look nothing like any picture or description of this fashion culture that I can find, which is a bummer since I think that the concept could have been done in a very interesting way. I went a different direction myself because that style of fashion is just not in my mental wheelhouse, but bottom line is that Jynx completely misses the mark. You'd think that maybe then she's succeeding at other aspects of her concept, but no, she's supposed to be this Pokemon that hypnotizes people with dancing, but she doesn't look like a dancer. Jynx is also supposed to be a seductress, and if you smash, my only question is why? Typing is another problem. I am now including Smoochum in this critique. Their typing and their designs make absolutely no sense together. Neither of them look very psychic. Maybe psychotic in Jynx's case with those eyes? I know that some types are kind of nebulous and you can qualify as a psychic type if you look just vaguely ethereal or kind of mysterious or in terrible pain, but even if I gave them a pass in that regard, there's absolutely no reason for me to believe that they're ice type. If I didn't know any better, I'd guess that they're both normal because I default to that as my guess when I can't discern anything else. Now for Smoochum, it is slightly more forgivable because Smoochum was introduced in a later generation than Jynx, and they were clearly working backwards from Jynx because of it. However, there's no excuse for Jynx. If you ask me, none of the Ice-type Pokemon from Gen 1 really pushed the ice theming that far, and this includes Articuno. I mean, Zapdos and Moltres take their respective typing concepts much further. They are obviously electric and fire types respectively. But at least all the other Ice-type mons are clearly water-related, or hell, they're at least blue. You could guess. So for my redesign, I first decided to throw out the entire gyaru concept since the original designers didn't seem too interested in it anyways, and instead focused on the other major ideas, that being that Jynx was supposed to be seductive and hypnotic, and Smoochum was supposed to be cutesy and girly. I decided on this idea that Jynx and Smoochum were kind of like pageant people. Like, Smoochum was a little pageant princess, and then Jynx would be an icy pageant queen, maybe a very cutthroat one at that. I thought that pageantry could lend itself really well to a psychic type that's constantly trying to put on a show and enamor others. Speaking of psychic, I thought it would be interesting if Jynx would float and sway back and forth in the air, since that would come across more in the realm of psychic while still maintaining that idea of constant movement and swaying from Jynx's dex. I would accept the critique that my design for Jynx could read as more of a dark ice type or even a ghost ice type because of the eyes and the floating. But to be fair to myself, refer to my previous statement about how pretty much anything qualifies for psychic designs. Supernatural stuff just overlaps. Anyways, I decided to cool down their color palette significantly because, you know, ice, cold, you get it. I was tempted to make Smoochum purple as well because of this, but I decided against it. Fun fact, Smoochum is the only ice-type Pokemon that is pink. Ignoring the fact that this is probably for a good reason, I thought that it was neat, so I decided to keep the warmer color despite me feeling like it could have benefited from being more completely cool-toned. I didn't really realize it until I got further into this, but I also never liked that Smoochum and Jynx didn't look all that related. I dropped my ring and I'm so sad. Well, I do in some ways appreciate it, because Smoochum is much easier on the eyes, but I used to forget constantly that Smoochum actually evolved into Jynx. But not even in a Remoraid Octillery sense where the discrepancy is clearly intentional. I think my designs, due to more of a shared color palette and some more similar shapes between the two of them, actually look a little more related than the originals, but that might be bias for my own work, and I recognize that. Overall, I like my designs. I'm gonna say this every time, aren't I? I think they're still in the realm of something that could actually be official, but they still have much clearer concepts behind them. At the very least, I would guess at their ice type, so they have that on the original. Moving right along to the next redesign. Boltund is the first and pretty much only one on this list that, in a vacuum, I actually don't mind the design too much. Boltund is plenty charming, and due to the striking yellow, high contrast, and spiky shapes, really reads as a bold electric type. The only real gripe about this design that I still don't understand is the weird rings on Boltund's legs. My best guess is that maybe they were going for battery, but to me it really just reads as awkward dog pants. Why does the dog need pants? My real issue with it, frankly, is that it evolves from Yampers. I hope you're sensing a theme with that, because it shall continue. Yampers is such a good design. First things first, Yampers is so fucking cute that I actually squealed out loud the first time I encountered it in my sword playthrough. But getting into the nitty-gritty of the design, it's really readable. The tiny lightning bolt tail and yellow accents makes it very easily understood that it's an electric type, which is awesome. And the body shape is obviously screaming corgi. In a sea of many, many dog Pokemon, a corgi is something different and unique, and it works really well considering it was introduced for the Galar region, which is based off of the UK. It's a nice little nod to the Queen's corgis. Also, the green details really shake things up even further and gives a really unique vibe to Yampers. It loses a lot of that uniqueness when it evolves, making Boltund a pretty crappy evolution. Obviously, I applaud the higher contrast, that's definitely something that I'm personally biased towards, but it's sort of generic when compared to Yampers. It's kind of just this vague shepherd shape, and the green is gone. I was indeed disappointed when I got my Yampers to finally evolve, but not disappointed enough to sacrifice the admittedly pretty awesome stats, and also having to abandon a cute dog. I'm not a monster. So, just like with Hypno, one of my biggest goals for the redesign was to make Boltund look more clearly linked to Yampers, but still more exciting and energetic than Yampers to make it an actually fun evolution. One of the biggest ways that I did this was bring back some of the bold shapes of Yampers, like the big ears and the big floofy neck, and just make them spikier. I also tried to go for a clearer lightning bolt tail shape for Boltund, only I made the end super spiky so as not to just do a Pikachu tail. I wanted to make the markings in the fur more jagged and spiky too. I feel like it just brings a lot more energy to the design and also prevents it from looking like weird pants. I was loosely placing the colors according to a reference image of a Pembroke Welsh Corgi, since I decided to keep Boltund's longer legs, but I didn't want to completely abandon the Corgi vibes. Of course, finally I brought back that green, but really bumped up the saturation to make it extra bold. I don't know if this is the style of the company, but I have noticed that the official art usually has quite low saturation in general, and if you ask me, while they can get away with it in pixel art, the 3D renders of the newer games usually look like they were just sitting out in the sun a little too long and their colors faded. This isn't a Boltund specific comment, this is just a general observation that I've never been the biggest fan of. I prefer a very high saturation, especially in very whimsical settings like the Pokemon universe. Anyways, this was a really easy design for me for some reason. Very little fiddling, except in the colors. The shape came very naturally, which admittedly made me quite frustrated that it's not what we actually got in the game. Like, if little old me could come up with this thing, why didn't Game Freak? I know I've got the gift of hindsight, and I'm sure my design might not appeal to everyone either, but I'm allowed to feel a little petty. Anyways, time for a very commonly hated one again. A heavily memed on design for good reason. I must reiterate, or just iterate if you skipped that section in the intro, being ugly isn't inherently a sin in the world of Pokemon design, but I feel like Alolan Persian falls into the category of ugly and bad. I genuinely don't understand what they were going for. I have seen people point out that they were likely trying to elicit a Russian blue cat because of the coloring and how apparently that cat breed is known for having a giant head. This sort of tracks since Alolan Persian is supposed to be more like a domestic cat than a wild cat in this region, but like, why is the head so orbular? It's not just a big head, it's an egg head. The bigger problem for me though is that the face is so tiny on the big egg head, which just looks really awkward. And the fact that the body is just completely unchanged shape-wise does not help at all. I'm also not sure what a Russian blue has to do with a tropical region of Alola that's all about island life and bright poppy colors. When compared to the other regional variants, love them or hate them, they all make sense for Alola. A better direction to me would have been maybe a jungle cat to fit with the general theme of Alola, but even with their idea, I feel like this just was really poorly executed. My challenge to myself as a result was to prove that this could have been great, or at the very least better, had they tweaked a few things. First things first, I just made the shape of the head different. I tried to retain more of a Meowth kind of head and face since it's already pretty cute and gigantic. I had the face just be more proportional as well while still trying to keep the cheeks pretty big. I also decided to make the little gem on Persian's forehead really big since I thought it made it look more regal and fancy. I thought that it would fit with the idea of a stuffy house cat. I also decided to make this Persian floofy. I'm not a huge fan of that for a tropical regional variant, but it does really solidify the idea of this Persian being an indoor house cat rather than a native wild cat, considering it would probably die without AC. I also thought that this fed into a sort of regal aesthetic and also hid any potential proportion issues between the head and the body. I tried to make all of this Persian a little thicker, but I'll be the first to admit that drawing animals is not my strongest suit, so in case I fail to do so, neck floof. One thing that I did for nerd reasons was adding in white markings. One of the most common signs of an animal becoming domesticated is acquiring white spots. In the wild, generally speaking, spots of white have no real benefit to animals, as they only serve to harm camouflage. There are, of course, outliers like fawns who have white spots on their booties to blend in with dappled light or snowy ground, but they are outliers and not the rule. I just thought that it would be kind of fun to do since this version of Persian is supposed to be more domesticated, though it does take it further away from a Russian blue. It is less boring though, so pros and cons to every decision, I suppose. I don't have too much more to say since I didn't actually change too much, frankly. I think that this is one of those designs where I really have to wonder how many passes the original concept went through before it became official. How many people actually looked at it, understood the point, and gave it a thumbs up? And more importantly, why? I didn't do much, and yet I feel my design meets the prompt and is significantly less ugly. Again, maybe I'm biased because I drew it, but still. Regardless, this isn't the last one. The next two are what? You know, if someone told me that they designed a fairy that looks like a debutante plague doctor, the last thing that would come to my mind is Aromatisse. But for some reason, that's still what Freaktendo went with. I mean, the concept of a glammed up, frilly, pink gothic icon is really interesting, but I don't think that Spritzee or Aromatisse achieve the look even in the slightest. And on top of that, I am also not getting perfume bottle from either of them. Like, they're just kind of round. Spritzee's design is cute, even if, for me, it doesn't actually get across any of the inspirations, but Aromatisse makes me extremely uncomfortable to look at, actually. I feel like the design is just confused. So Aromatisse has these feathers that kind of look like little pigtails, and then because of the pink floof, it has kind of a cutesy, babyish diaper butt going on. Okay, fine, cute, I guess, but then it has the sassy pose, and dramatic eyelashes, and the little cutout for its leg, and I'm just gonna say it, I don't like all that stuff. It's so close together. It's awkward, potentially really inappropriate, and just plain confusing, because am I supposed to be getting all of that out of this design? Aromatisse especially is just needlessly busy color-wise. The main colors here are obviously pink and purple with red as an accent, but then the yellow shows up in the feather pigtails. So a new accent? I like the idea of yellow since it's a nice contrast to the purple, but when you have more than one color that comes in to act as a contrast to everything else, you need to have at least one of them be more incorporated in the design to make it feel like it's actually purposeful, at least in my opinion. My general rule of thumb is to avoid having more than one accent color like the plague. Haha, get it, because they're supposed to be plague doctors. Anyways, genuinely, looking at this design, it feels almost like they meant to put pink there, but messed up somehow, and no one caught it in time. I made a couple of little edits to Aromatisse just with changing the colors of these feathers, and all of them look better than the yellow. I made it pink, I made it red, I made it the pale blue-gray of the face, all of it better. I'm not an expert on color theory, mind you, but I know what works for me, and this does not work for me. So my goal was initially going to be ignoring all of the ideas that Spritzee and Aromatisse were supposed to have and just focus on making a fairy-type plague doctor, but then I remembered that as much as that would have been good for my brain, that's not quite the same as a redesign of these mons. So I decided to try to adhere to the other ideas, like having them be fancy, cutesy bird guys, and also trying to make them give off perfume bottle vibes. I still tried to have the plague doctor idea come across more, specifically by making there be a lot more areas of black on the design. The main thing to help with the perfume bottle aesthetic involved me giving them tails that had little poofy round tips, which I actually really struggled to make look good, but I think I did okay in the end. The idea was that they could elicit an image of those little pumps that old perfume bottles have, which I think can get the idea across a bit better rather than a vague round shape. I also tried to really go crazy with the colors for Aromatisse in particular, since it's supposed to be this really fancy, extravagant, even gaudy type of mon. I also wanted to prove that you could make all the colors work together if you just tweak them a little bit. I did have to futz a lot with the colors overall because I couldn't decide how much of each to put everywhere, but I feel like I ended up really liking what I settled on. I like that Spritzee ended up looking kind of awkward compared to Aromatisse, who looks pretty darn cool. I really like that sort of thing in the Pokemon world where the baby version is a little twerp that gets a glow up after it battles its way through puberty. I decided to make the little wingy shapes on both of them have big red love hearts in them because I think that it's cute and fun and helps make them look more like fairies or something. I don't know. Again, I think that like all the supernatural types, fairy can just be whatever. Sentient dessert, stuffed animals, goblinoid, woman. These two designs, admittedly, are the ones that I feel the least sure about. I don't know if I executed my idea the best. I like what I did better than the originals, but I still don't know if I love them on their own. I definitely went out of my comfort zone in general with them, so I guess I'm just like a little less confident. Still, again, I do think it's an improvement, so I guess it's a success. Quick lower quality interjection because I forgot that I wanted to do a fan art feature for this video, but I forgot to record this part. Anyway, I got this amazing, this looks so cool. I got this amazing thing from Lord Eldrin Boy on Blue Sky. They did like a shot from the one of my little shorts about Hamish and Mina, and oh my fucking god, this looks so cool. Like, they got the lighting down, the kind of blank, sort of unreadable expression really comes across. The folds and the clothing. Dude, if I actually drew Hamish like this, I would understand why everybody wants to have sex with him. I'm just saying. Like, I'm just saying. If this is actually how I drew him, I would get it. Because he do be kind of looking fine. It's just so cool. I love this so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Links to their stuff are in the description. Check them out. Support them because they're clearly like a really good artist, and also they're nice to me, and so that's pretty cool, right? Okay, back to the rest of my outro. Whoopsie doodles. And there you have it, a bunch of monsters redesigned. These sorts of designs are really outside of my comfort zone, frankly, so this was definitely a big personal challenge, and I'm pretty proud of how they all turned out. Honestly, this was just really fun to do, which makes sense since, as I said, I originally wasn't doing this for a video and just started to do this independently for fun, but I would definitely like to do this again. There are a lot more designs in the huge pool of pocket monsters that I would love to take a crack at, so there will most likely be another video along the same vein somewhere down the line, but focusing on the present again, I'd love to know what you think about my redesigns in the comments. Do you think that I did a better job than the originals? Do you agree with my critiques of the originals? Do you wish I'd gone in different directions? Was there somebody you wanted included that didn't get a feature? Do you have no opinion because you were just listening to me talk and weren't actually paying attention to what I was doing? I'd love to hear your thoughts, whatever they may be. If you've made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you spending time with me. Your time is important, and donating some of it to an internet stranger is very generous. I only hope that I made it worth your while. If you're new here, hi, nice to meet you. Maybe consider checking out some of my other content, or maybe even consider subscribing. You don't have to, and I understand if you don't want to. I mean, you're probably busy, so no hard feelings. However, if you're not new here, I'm very glad to have you back. Always nice to see a familiar face, and yours is especially nice. Yeah, I'll stop yapping and let you go. Thanks again for hanging out. Give yourself some patience today. Drink some water, and most importantly, remember that you matter. Bye! I am single-handedly going to take every animal in this room and cast a silencing curse upon them. That's right, come here, baby. You must be silent forever. You must be quiet. No more squeakums in the middle of the night.